Section 55 of The Book of Household Management. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Christine Blashford. The Book of Household Management by Isabella Beaton. Recipes, Chapter 25, Part 2. Boiled cauliflowers, 1104. Ingredients. To each half a gallon of water, allow 1 heaped tablespoonful of salt. Mode. Choose cauliflowers that are close and white, trim off the decayed outside leaves, and cut the stalk off flat at the bottom. Open the flower a little in places to remove the insects, which generally are found about the stalk, and let the cauliflowers lie in salt and water for an hour previous to dressing them, with their heads downwards. This will effectually draw out all the vermin. Then put them into fast boiling water, with the addition of salt in the above proportion, and let them boil briskly over a good fire, keeping the saucepan uncovered. The water should be well skimmed, and when the cauliflowers are tender, take them up with a slice. Let them drain, and if large enough, place them upright in the dish. Serve with plain melted butter, a little of which may be poured over the flour. Time. Small cauliflower 12 to 15 minutes, large one 20 to 25 minutes after the water boils. Average cost for large cauliflowers 6d each. Sufficient. Allow 1 large cauliflower for 3 persons. Seasonable from the beginning of June to the end of September. Cauliflowers à la sauce blanche. Entremet or side dish to be served with the second course. 1105. Ingredients. 3 cauliflowers, half a pint of sauce blanche, or French melted butter No. 378, 3 oz of butter, salt and water. Mode. Cleanse the cauliflowers as in the preceding recipe, and cut the stalks off flat at the bottom. Boil them until tender in salt water, to which the above proportion of butter has been added, and be careful to take them up the moment they are done, or they will break, and the appearance of the dish will be spoiled. Drain them well, and dish them in the shape of a large cauliflower. Have ready half a pint of sauce made by recipe No. 378. Pour it over the flowers, and serve hot and quickly. Time. Small cauliflowers 12 to 15 minutes, large ones 20 to 25 minutes after the water boils. Average cost, large cauliflowers in full season 6d each. Sufficient. 1 large cauliflower for 3 or 4 persons. Seasonable from the beginning of June to the end of September. Cauliflower and broccoli. These are only forms of the wild cabbage in its cultivated state. They are both well known, but we may observe that the purple and white broccoli are only varieties of the cauliflower. Cauliflowers with Parmesan cheese, entremet or side dish to be served with the second course. 1106. Ingredients. 2 or 3 cauliflowers, rather more than half a pint of white sauce No. 378, 2 tablespoonfuls of grated Parmesan cheese, 2 oz of fresh butter, 3 tablespoonfuls of breadcrumbs. Mode. Cleanse and boil the cauliflowers by recipe No. 1104, and drain them and dish them with the flowers standing upright. Have ready the above proportion of white sauce, pour sufficient of it over the cauliflowers just to cover the top, sprinkle over this some rasped Parmesan cheese and breadcrumbs, and drop on these the butter, which should be melted but not oiled. Brown with a salamander or before the fire, and pour round but not over the flowers the remainder of the sauce, with which should be mixed a small quantity of grated Parmesan cheese. Time. Altogether half an hour. Average cost for large cauliflowers 6d each. Sufficient. 3 small cauliflowers for 1 dish. Seasonable from the beginning of June to the end of September. Celery. 1107. With a good heart and nicely blanched, this vegetable is generally eaten raw, and is usually served with the cheese. Let the roots be washed free from dirt, all the decayed and outside leaves being cut off, preserving as much of the stalk as possible, and all specks or blemishes being carefully removed. Should the celery be large, divide it lengthways into quarters, and place it root downwards in a celery glass, which should be rather more than half filled with water. The top leaves may be curled by shredding them in narrow strips with the point of a clean skewer at a distance of about 4 inches from the top. Average cost 2d per head. Sufficient. Allow 2 heads for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable from October to April. Note. This vegetable is exceedingly useful for flavouring soups, sauces, etc., and makes a very nice addition to winter salad. Stewed celery à la crème. 1108. Ingredients. 6 heads of celery. To each half a gallon of water, allow 1 heaped tablespoonful of salt, 1 blade of pounded mace, a third of a pint of cream. Mode. Wash the celery thoroughly, trim and boil it in salt and water until tender. Put the cream and pounded mace into a stewpan, shake it over the fire until the cream thickens, dish the celery, pour over the sauce, and serve. Time. Large heads of celery 25 minutes, small ones 15 to 20 minutes. Average cost 2d per head. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable from October to April. Alexander's. This plant is the Smyrnium olustratum of science, and is used in this country in the same way in which celery is. It is a native of Great Britain and is found in its wild state near the seacoast. It received its name from the Italian Herba alexandrina and is supposed to have been originally brought from Alexandria, but be this as it may, its cultivation is now almost entirely abandoned. Stewed celery with white sauce 1. 1109. Ingredients: 6 heads of celery, 1 ounce of butter. To each half a gallon of water allow 1 heaped tablespoonful of salt, half a pint of white sauce No. 537 or 538. Mode. Have ready sufficient boiling water just to cover the celery, with salt and butter in the above proportion. Wash the celery well, cut off the decayed outside leaves, trim away the green tops, and shape the root into a point. Put it into the boiling water, let it boil rapidly until tender, then take it out, drain well, place it upon a dish, and pour over about half a pint of white sauce made by either of the recipes No. 537 or 538. It may also be plainly boiled as above, placed on toast, and melted butter poured over, the same as asparagus is dished. Time. Large heads of celery 25 minutes, small ones 15 to 20 minutes after the water boils. Average cost 2d per head. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable from October to April. Origin of celery. In the marshes and ditches of this country there is to be found a very common plant known by the name of smallage. This is the wild form of celery, but, by being subjected to cultivation, it loses its acrid nature and becomes mild and sweet. In its natural state it has a peculiar rank, coarse taste and smell, and its root was reckoned by the ancients as one of the 5 greater aperient roots. There is a variety of this in which the root becomes turnip-shaped and large. It is called celeriae and is extensively used by the Germans and preferred by them to celery. In a raw state this plant does not suit weak stomachs. Cooked it is less difficult of digestion, although a large quantity should not be taken. Stewed celery with white sauce 2. 1110. Ingredients: 6 heads of celery, half a pint of white stock or weak broth, 4 tablespoonfuls of cream, thickening of butter and flour, 1 blade of pounded mace, a very little grated nutmeg, pepper and salt to taste. Mode. Wash the celery, strip off the outer leaves, and cut it into lengths of about 4 inches. Put these into a saucepan with the broth and stew till tender, which will be in from 20 to 25 minutes. Then add the remaining ingredients, simmer all together for 4 or 5 minutes, pour into a dish and serve. It may be garnished with sippets of toasted bread. Time. Altogether half an hour. Average cost 2d per head. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable from October to April. Note. By cutting the celery into smaller pieces, by stewing it a little longer, and when done by pressing it through a sieve, the above stew may be converted into a puree of celery. To dress cucumbers. 1111. Ingredients: 3 tablespoonfuls of salad oil, 4 tablespoonfuls of vinegar, salt and pepper to taste, cucumber. Mode. Pare the cucumber, cut it equally into very thin slices, and commence cutting from the thick end. If commenced at the stalk, the cucumber will most likely have an exceedingly bitter taste, far from agreeable. Put the slices into a dish, sprinkle over salt and pepper, and pour over oil and vinegar in the above proportion. Turn the cucumber about, and it is ready to serve. This is a favourite accompaniment to boiled salmon, is a nice addition to all descriptions of salads, and makes a pretty garnish to lobster salad. Average cost, when scarce, 1 shilling to 2 shillings 6d, when cheapest may be had for 4d each. Seasonable, forced from the beginning of March to the end of June, in full season in July, August, and September. Geographical distribution of the cucumbers. This family is not known in the frigid zone, is somewhat rare in the temperate, but in the tropical and warmer regions throughout the world they are abundant. They are most plentiful in the continent of Hindostan, but in America are not near so plentiful. Many of the kinds supply useful articles of consumption for food, and others are actively medicinal in their virtues. Generally speaking, delicate stomachs should avoid this plant, for it is cold and indigestible. Cucumbers à la poulette. 1112. Ingredients: 2 or 3 cucumbers, salt and vinegar, 2 ounces of butter, flour, half a pint of broth, 1 teaspoonful of minced parsley, a lump of sugar, the yolks of 2 eggs, salt and pepper to taste. Mode. Pare and cut the cucumbers into slices of an equal thickness, and let them remain in a pickle of salt and vinegar for half an hour. Then drain them in a cloth, and put them into a stewpan with the butter. Fry them over a brisk fire, but do not brown them, and then dredge over them a little flour. Add the broth, skim off all the fat, which will rise to the surface, and boil gently until the gravy is somewhat reduced, but the cucumber should not be broken. Stir in the yolks of the eggs, add the parsley, sugar, and a seasoning of pepper and salt. Bring the whole to the point of boiling, and serve. Time. Altogether 1 hour. Average cost, when cheapest, 4d each. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable in July, August and September, but may be had forced from the beginning of March. Fried cucumbers. 1113. Ingredients: 2 or 3 cucumbers, pepper and salt to taste, flour, oil or butter. Mode. Pare the cucumbers and cut them into slices of an equal thickness, commencing to slice from the thick and not the stalk end of the cucumber. Wipe the slices dry with a cloth, dredge them with flour, and put them into a pan of boiling oil or butter. Keep turning them about until brown, lift them out of the pan, let them drain, and serve piled lightly in a dish. These will be found a great improvement to rump steak. They should be placed on a dish with the steak on the top. Time 5 minutes. Average cost, when cheapest, 4d each. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable, forced from the beginning of March to the end of June, in full season in July and August. Properties and uses of the cucurbits. The common cucumber is the C. sativus of science, and although the whole of the family have a similar action in the animal economy, yet there are some which present us with great anomalies. The roots of those which are perennial contain, besides fecula, which is their base, a resinous, acrid, and bitter principle. The fruits of this family, however, have in general a sugary taste, and are more or less dissolving and perfumed, as we find in the melons, gourds, cucumbers, vegetable marrows, and squashes. But these are slightly laxative if partaken of largely. In tropical countries, this order furnishes the inhabitants with a large portion of their food, which even in the most arid deserts and most barren islands is of the finest quality. In China, Kashmir, and Persia, they are cultivated on the lakes on the floating collections of weeds common in these localities. In India they are everywhere abundant, either in a cultivated or wild state, and the seeds of all the family are sweet and mucilaginous. Stewed cucumbers. 1114. Ingredients: 3 large cucumbers, flour, butter, rather more than half a pint of good brown gravy. Mode. Cut the cucumbers lengthwise, the size of the dish they are intended to be served in. Empty them of the seeds, and put them into boiling water with a little salt, and let them simmer for 5 minutes. Then take them out, place them in another stewpan with the gravy, and let them boil over a brisk fire until the cucumbers are tender. Should these be bitter, add a lump of sugar. Carefully dish them, skim the sauce, pour over the cucumbers, and serve. Time. Altogether 20 minutes. Average cost, when cheapest, 1d each. Sufficient for 3 or 4 persons. Seasonable in June, July, and August, but may be had forced from the beginning of March. The chate. This cucumber is a native of Egypt and Arabia, and produces a fruit of almost the same substance as that of the melon. In Egypt it is esteemed by the upper-class natives, as well as by Europeans, as the most pleasant fruit they have. Stewed cucumbers with onions. 1115. Ingredients: 6 cucumbers, 3 moderate-sized onions, not quite 1 pint of white stock, cayenne and salt to taste, the yolks of 2 eggs, a very little grated nutmeg. Mode. Pare and slice the cucumbers, take out the seeds, and cut the onions into thin slices. Put these both into a stewpan with the stock, and let them boil for 1/4 hour or longer, should the cucumbers be very large. Beat up the yolks of 2 eggs, stir these into the sauce, add the cayenne, salt, and grated nutmeg, bring it to the point of boiling, and serve. Do not allow the sauce to boil, or it will curdle. This is a favourite dish with lamb or mutton chops, rump steaks, etc. Time. Altogether 20 minutes. Average cost, when cheapest, 4d each. Sufficient for 6 or 7 persons. Seasonable in July, August, and September, but may be had forced from the beginning of March. The melon. This is another species of the cucumber, and is highly esteemed for its rich and delicious fruit. It was introduced to this country from Jamaica in 1570, since which period it has continued to be cultivated. It was formerly called the musk melon. Endive. 1116. This vegetable, so beautiful in appearance, makes an excellent addition to winter salad, when lettuces and other salad herbs are not obtainable. It is usually placed in the centre of the dish, and looks remarkably pretty with slices of beetroot, hard-boiled eggs, and curled celery placed round it, so that the colours contrast nicely. In preparing it, carefully wash and cleanse it free from insects, which are generally found near the heart. Remove any decayed or dead leaves, and dry it thoroughly by shaking in a cloth. This vegetable may also be served hot, stewed in cream, brown gravy, or butter, but when dressed thus, the sauce it is stewed in should not be very highly seasoned, as that would destroy and overpower the flavour of the vegetable. Average cost, 1d per head. Sufficient 1 head for a salad for 4 persons. Seasonable from November to March. Endive. This is the C. endivium of science, and is much used as a salad. It belongs to the family of the Compositae, with chicory, common goat's beard, and others of the same genus. Withering states that before the stems of the common goat's beard shoot up the roots, boiled like asparagus, have the same flavour, and are nearly as nutritious. We are also informed by Villars that the children in Dauphine universally eat the stems and leaves of the young plant before the flowers appear with great avidity. The fresh juice of these tender herbs is said to be the best solvent of bile. Stewed endive. 1117. Ingredients: 6 heads of endive, salt and water, 1 pint of broth, thickening of butter and flour, 1 tablespoonful of lemon juice, a small lump of sugar. Mode. Wash and free the endive thoroughly from insects, remove the green part of the leaves, and put it into boiling water, slightly salted. Let it remain for 10 minutes, then take it out, drain it till there is no water remaining, and chop it very fine. Put it into a stewpan with the broth, add a little salt and a lump of sugar, and boil until the endive is perfectly tender. When done, which may be ascertained by squeezing a piece between the thumb and finger, add a thickening of butter and flour and the lemon juice, let the sauce boil up, and serve. Time. 10 minutes to boil, 5 minutes to simmer in the broth. Average cost 1d. per head. Sufficient for 3 or 4 persons. Seasonable from November to March. Endive à la Française. 1118. Ingredients: 6 heads of endive, 1 pint of broth, 3 oz. of fresh butter, salt, pepper, and grated nutmeg to taste. Mode. Wash and boil the endive as in the preceding recipe, chop it rather fine, and put into a stewpan with the broth. Boil over a brisk fire until the sauce is all reduced, then put in the butter, pepper, salt, and grated nutmeg. The latter must be very sparingly used. Mix all well together, bring it to the boiling point, and serve very hot. Time. 10 minutes to boil, 5 minutes to simmer in the broth. Average cost 1d. per head. Sufficient for 3 or 4 persons. Seasonable from November to March. To boil haricots blancs, or white haricot beans. 1119. Ingredients: 1 quart of white haricot beans, 2 quarts of soft water, 1 oz. of butter, 1 heaped tablespoonful of salt. Mode. Put the beans into cold water and let them soak from 2 to 4 hours according to their age. Then put them into cold water, salted in the above proportion, bring them to boil, and let them simmer very slowly until tender. Pour the water away from them, let them stand by the side of the fire, with the lid of the saucepan partially off to allow the beans to dry. Then add 1 oz. of butter and a seasoning of pepper and salt. Shake the beans about for a minute or 2 and serve. Do not stir them with a spoon for fear of breaking them to pieces. Time. After the water boils, from 2 to 2 1/2 hours. Average cost 4d. per quart. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable in winter when other vegetables are scarce. Note. Haricots blancs, when new and fresh, should be put into boiling water, and do not require any soaking previous to dressing. Haricots and lentils. Although these vegetables are not much used in this country, yet in France and other Catholic countries, from their peculiar constituent properties, they form an excellent substitute for animal food during Lent and Maigre days. At the time of the prevalence of the Roman religion in this country, they were probably much more generally used than at present. As reformations are often carried beyond necessity, possibly lentils may have fallen into disuse, as an article of diet amongst Protestants, for fear the use of them might be considered a sign of popery. Haricots blancs à la maître d'hôtel. 1120. Ingredients: 1 quart of white haricot beans, 1/4 lb. of fresh butter, 1 tablespoonful of minced parsley, pepper and salt to taste, the juice of half a lemon. Mode. Should the beans be very dry, soak them for an hour or 2 in cold water, and boil them until perfectly tender, as in the preceding recipe. If the water should boil away, replenish it with a little more cold, which makes the skin of the beans tender. Let them be very thoroughly done, drain them well, then add to them the butter, minced parsley, and a seasoning of pepper and salt. Keep moving the stewpan over the fire without using a spoon, as this would break the beans, and when the various ingredients are well mixed with them, squeeze in the lemon juice and serve very hot. Time. From 2 to 2 1/2 hours to boil the beans. Average cost 4d. per quart. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable in winter. Haricot beans. This is the haricot blanc of the French, and is a native of India. It ripens readily in dry summers in most parts of Britain, but its culture has hitherto been confined to gardens in England, but in Germany and Switzerland it is grown in fields. It is usually harvested by pulling up the plants, which, being dried, are stacked and thrashed. The haulm is both of little bulk and little use, but the seed is used in making the esteemed French dish called haricot, with which it were well if the working classes of this country were acquainted. There is, perhaps, no other vegetable dish so cheap and easily cooked, and at the same time so agreeable and nourishing. The beans are boiled and then mixed with a little fat or salt butter, and a little milk or water and flour. From 3,840 parts of kidney bean, Einholf obtained 1,805 parts of matter analogous to starch, 351 of vegeto-animal matter, and 799 parts of mucilage. Haricot beans and minced onions. 1121. Ingredients: 1 quart of white haricot beans, 4 middling-sized onions, 1/4 pint of good brown gravy, pepper and salt to taste, a little flour. Mode. Peel and mince the onions not too finely and fry them in a butter of a light brown colour. Dredge over them a little flour and add the gravy and a seasoning of pepper and salt. Have ready a pint of haricot beans well boiled and drained, put them with the onions and gravy, mix all well together and serve very hot. Time. From 2 to 2 1/2 hours to boil the beans, 5 minutes to fry the onions. Average cost 4d. per quart. Sufficient for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable in winter. Horseradish 1122. This root, scraped, is always served with hot roast beef and is used for garnishing many kinds of boiled fish. Let the horseradish remain in cold water for an hour, wash it well, and with a sharp knife scrape it into very thin shreds, commencing from the thick end of the root. Arrange some of it lightly in a small glass dish, and the remainder used for garnishing the joint. It should be placed in tufts round the border of the dish, with 1 or 2 bunches on the meat. Average cost 2d. per stick. Seasonable from October to June. The horseradish. This belongs to the tribe Alicidae, and is highly stimulant and exciting to the stomach. It has been recommended in chronic rheumatism, palsy, dropsical complaints, and in cases of enfeebled digestion. Its principal use, however, is as a condiment to promote appetite and excite the digestive organs. The horseradish contains sulphur to the extent of 30% in the number of its elements, and it is to the presence of this quality that the metal vessels in which the radish is sometimes distilled are turned into a black colour. It is one of the most powerful excitants and antiscorbutics we have, and forms the basis of several medical preparations in the forms of wine, tinctures, and syrups. Lettuces 1123. These form one of the principal ingredients to summer salads, should be nicely blanched, and be eaten young. They are seldom served in any other way, but may be stewed and sent to table in a good brown gravy flavoured with lemon juice. In preparing them for a salad, carefully wash them free from dirt, pick off all the decayed and outer leaves, and dry them thoroughly by shaking them in a cloth. Cut off the stalks, and either halve or cut the lettuces into small pieces. The manner of cutting them up entirely depends on the salad for which they are intended. In France, the lettuces are sometimes merely wiped with the cloth and not washed, the cooks there declaring that the act of washing them injuriously affects the pleasant crispness of the plant. In this case, scrupulous attention must be paid to each leaf, and the grit thoroughly wiped away. Average cost, when cheapest, 1d. each. Sufficient. Allow 2 lettuces for 4 or 5 persons. Seasonable from March to the end of August, but may be had all the year. The lettuce. All the varieties of the garden lettuce have originated from the Lactuca sativa of science, which has never yet been found in a wild state. Hence it may be concluded that it is merely another form of some species, changed through the effects of cultivation. In its young state the lettuce forms a well-known and wholesome salad, containing a bland pellucid juice with little taste or smell, and having a cooling and soothing influence on the system. This arises from the large quantities of water and mucilage it contains, and not from any narcotic principle which it is supposed to possess. During the period of flowering, it abounds in a peculiar milky juice, which flows from the stem when wounded, and which has been found to be possessed of decided medicinal properties. Baked mushrooms, a breakfast, luncheon, or supper dish. 1124. Ingredients: 16 to 20 mushroom flaps, butter, pepper to taste. Mode. For this mode of cooking, the mushroom flaps are better than the buttons, and should not be too large. Cut off a portion of the stalk, peel the top, and wipe the mushrooms carefully with a piece of flannel and a little fine salt. Put them into a tin baking dish, with a very small piece of butter placed on each mushroom. Sprinkle over a little pepper, and let them bake for about 20 minutes, or longer should the mushrooms be very large. Have ready a very hot dish, pile the mushrooms high in the centre, pour the gravy round, and send them to table quickly with very hot plates. Time. 20 minutes, large mushrooms, half an hour. Average cost, 1d. each for large mushroom flaps. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable. Meadow mushrooms in September and October. Cultivated mushrooms may be had at any time. Fungi. These are common parasitical plants originating in the production of copious filamentous threads, called the mycelium or spawn. Rounded tubers appear on the mycelium. Some of these enlarge rapidly, burst an outer covering, which is left at the base, and protrude a thick stalk bearing at its summit a rounded body, which in a short time expands into the pileus or cap. The gills, which occupy its lower surface, consist of parallel plates bearing naked sporules over their whole surface. Some of the cells, which are visible by the microscope, produce 4 small cells at their free summit, apparently by germination and constriction. These are the sporules, and this is the development of the agarics. Broiled mushrooms, a breakfast, luncheon, or supper dish. 1125. Ingredients: mushroom flaps, pepper and salt to taste, butter, lemon juice. Mode. Cleanse the mushrooms by wiping them with a piece of flannel and a little salt. Cut off a portion of the stalk and peel the tops. Broil them over a clear fire, turning them once, and arrange them on a very hot dish. Put a small piece of butter on each mushroom, season with pepper and salt, and squeeze over them a few drops of lemon juice. Place the dish before the fire, and when the butter is melted, serve very hot and quickly. Moderate-sized flaps are better suited to this mode of cooking than the buttons, the latter are better in stews. Time, 10 minutes for medium-sized mushrooms. Average cost, 1d each for large mushrooms. Sufficient, allow 3 or 4 mushrooms to each person. Seasonable, meadow mushrooms in September and October. Cultivated mushrooms may be had at any time. Varieties of the mushroom. The common mushroom found in our estuaries is the Agaricus campestris of science, and another edible British species is A. georgii, but A. primulus is affirmed to be the most delicious mushroom. The morel is Morchella esculenta, and Tuber cibarium is the common truffle. There is in New Zealand a long fungus which grows from the head of a caterpillar, and which forms a horn, as it were, and is called Sphaeria robertsi. To preserve mushrooms. 1126. Ingredients. To each quart of mushrooms, allow 3 oz of butter, pepper and salt to taste, the juice of 1 lemon, clarified butter. Mode. Peel the mushrooms, put them into cold water with a little lemon juice, take them out and dry them very carefully in a cloth. Put the butter into a stewpan capable of holding the mushrooms. When it is melted, add the mushrooms, lemon juice, and a seasoning of pepper and salt. Draw them down over a slow fire and let them remain until their liquor is boiled away and they have become quite dry, but be careful in not allowing them to stick to the bottom of the stewpan. When done, put them into pots and pour over the top clarified butter. If wanted for immediate use, they will keep good a few days without being covered over. To re-warm them, put the mushrooms into a stewpan, strain the butter from them, and they will be ready for use. Average cost, 1d each. Seasonable, meadow mushrooms in September and October. Cultivated mushrooms may be had at any time. Localities of the mushroom. Mushrooms are to be met with in pastures, woods, and marshes, but are very capricious and uncertain in their places of growth, multitudes being obtained in one season where few or none were to be found in the preceding. They sometimes grow solitary, but more frequently they are gregarious and rise in a regular circular form. Many species are employed by man as food, but generally speaking they are difficult of digestion and by no means very nourishing. Many of them are also of suspicious qualities. Little reliance can be placed either on their taste, smell, or colour, as much depends on the situation in which they vegetate, and even the same plant, it is affirmed, may be innocent when young, but become noxious when advanced in age. Stewed mushrooms. 1127. Ingredients. 1 pint of mushroom buttons, 3 oz of fresh butter, white pepper and salt to taste, lemon juice, 1 teaspoonful of flour, cream or milk, 1 teaspoonful of grated nutmeg. Mode. Cut off the ends of the stalks and pare neatly a pint of mushroom buttons. Put them into a basin of water with a little lemon juice as they are done. When all are prepared, take them from the water with the hands to avoid the sediment, and put them into a stewpan with the fresh butter, white pepper, salt, and the juice of half a lemon. Cover the pan closely and let the mushrooms stew gently from 20 to 25 minutes. Then thicken the butter with the above proportion of flour, add gradually sufficient cream or cream and milk to make the sauce of a proper consistency, and put in the grated nutmeg. If the mushrooms are not perfectly tender, stew them for 5 minutes longer, remove every particle of butter which may be floating on the top, and serve. Time, half an hour. Average cost from 9d to 2s per pint. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable, meadow mushrooms in September and October. To procure mushrooms. In order to obtain mushrooms at all seasons, several methods of propagation have been had recourse to. It is said that in some parts of Italy a species of stone is used for this purpose, which is described as being of 2 different kinds. The one is found in the chalk hills near Naples, and has a white porous stalactical appearance. The other is a hardened turf from some volcanic mountains near Florence. These stones are kept in cellars and occasionally moistened with water which has been used in the washing of mushrooms, and are thus supplied with their minute seeds. In this country, gardeners provide themselves with what is called spawn, either from the old manure of cucumber beds, or purchase it from those whose business it is to propagate it. When thus procured, it is usually made up for sale in quadrilles, consisting of numerous white fibrous roots, having a strong smell of mushrooms. This is planted in rows in a dry situation, and carefully attended to for 5 or 6 weeks, when the bed begins to produce, and continues to do so for several months. Stewed mushrooms in gravy. 1128. Ingredients. 1 pint of mushroom buttons, 1 pint of brown gravy No. 436, 1/4 teaspoonful of grated nutmeg, cayenne and salt to taste. Mode. Make a pint of brown gravy by recipe 436. Cut nearly all the stalks away from the mushrooms and peel the tops. Put them into a stewpan with the gravy and simmer them gently from 20 minutes to half an hour. Add the nutmeg and a seasoning of cayenne and salt and serve very hot. Time 20 minutes to half an hour. Average cost 9d. to 2s. per pint. Sufficient for 5 or 6 persons. Seasonable meadow mushrooms in September and October. Analysis of fungi. The fungi have been examined chemically with much care both by Mademoiselle Bracquenot and Vauquelin, who designate the insoluble spongy matter by the name of fungin, and the soluble portion is found to contain the bolotic and the fungic acids. End of section 55.